I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. Tom, I'm going to have you introduce our guest today. It sounds very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. This is Roger, and Roger had a fascinating encounter camping in Montana. And, it's one of those things where you kind of go through through a process of elimination. There's just nothing else fits. So I'm going to hand it off to Roger and tell us what happened.
Well, I was among a group of people that had an opportunity to go to a place called Beartooth Mountain, and I was actually a bus driver that took a group, about 14 of us, and it was a kind of a long process. None of us had ever been backpacking or in that kind of an area before, so we went through a winter of just dreaming and talking and getting all of our gear ready. And finally in the middle of June, and it was back in the 80s, so it's 30 years ago. And we took off and got into Red Lodge, Montana, which is real close to Beartooth. And we stopped there for some provisions, and we got some fishing license and went up Beartooth Pass, which is a very difficult road, actually. Lots of switchbacks, straight up, and I was driving a yellow bus through that, so it was quite an experience. And we got up to the trailhead sometime in the middle of the afternoon, and it was our goal to get up to a place called Jewel Lake, which is right kind of at the foot of the mountain, as I remember. And it took us that afternoon. We got up to a lake about halfway to our destination, and we stayed there, fished a little bit, and it was in a treed area, so it wasn't quite past where the trees stopped. We got up the next morning and finished the trek up to the area that we were gonna camp, and the guide that we were with had been there several times and was very, very knowledgeable about what we were attempting to do. So it was nice to have that kind of leadership, and he was very sensitive about the footprint that we had. So most everybody shared a tent, and when we did put our tents up, we were several hundred feet away from each other. And then we had one common area that we kept the food, and it was an area where there were bear, so we had to be sensitive to that. And of course we had the food on ropes way up on the rocks, and so we knew we were in a quite an area. And the experience I had was one of the first nights, and it's almost like one of those episodic things that I can remember it just like it happened, and there aren't very many things that I remember about that trip, but this I do. It was a very beautiful night, and everybody had gone to bed, and I chose to stay up, and I laid on this large rock mound, and it was warm from the sun all day, and it was just a kind of surreal. And I was just laying on my back and looking up, and beautiful stars. You see the aspen glow. It's in that midnight time. And as I recall, the sun hadn't gone down too much earlier. I mean, you saw the sun and the glow pretty much till 10:30, 11 o'clock, as I recall. And I got tired and ended up going into my tent, and it was dark inside the tent. I didn't have a light, and had a flashlight, but I didn't have it on. And it was so quiet. That's one of the things that I remember real well, that you could lay on the ground there in my sleeping bag, and I could hear myself breathing. And it was that quiet, and I just couldn't believe how quiet things were. And off in the distance, I heard something walking, and I didn't know what it was, and just kind of laid there, and it kept getting closer and closer and closer, and it was a real heavy sound. I've never heard anything like it, so I really don't know what it was. And it came right up to the tent. I knew it was right at the tent, and it just stood there. And I knew something was there, but I couldn't hear anything. And that's what was kind of disturbing, is that if it's an animal of some kind, and this is something I deducted afterwards. It wasn't I said, hey, I think that's Bigfoot because I don't hear anything. You just didn't hear anything. And then I heard the feet or whatever it was slowly walk away. And I laid there for a while. It didn't really bother me. And the next morning at breakfast, I just started talking to the rest of the people, and I told them about the noise that I heard outside my tent. And the guide said, well, elk are very curious, and a lot of times they'll come into a campground, and it made sense, and nobody else had that happen. Nobody else heard anything, and that didn't surprise me because our tents were a long ways away from each other. So I just let it off, and never had anything like that happen again. And we were up at that particular lake about 7 days, 6 nights. And again, just that one experience. We did see some bear droppings. I don't recall seeing elk scat or anything like that. We did some nice fishing. There was a small cascading waterfall between 2 lakes, and it was just more of a stream. And one of the things that we had a heck of a time trying to catch anything on artificial lures, but our guide actually was able to pull a nice cutthroat out of the water with his hands, just hiding behind rocks. So it was just a kind of a neat exposure. And like I said, it's just something that happened, and it didn't make sense, because I know what if you're around a horse, or you're around some kind of livestock or some kind of an animal, you're going to hear them breathe. You'll hear snorts or grunts or something, but this was just quiet. And that's always just stuck out in my mind.
Hey, Roger. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, yeah. Let me ask you, because that's a fascinating thing that you just said. When it stood over in that moment, could you hear it breathe at all? Because you said that like it stood there, like, no, and everything was silent. Could you hear it breathe?
No, I couldn't, but I didn't hear it walk away, and I distinctly heard it coming up to the tent, and it sounded like, a lift and a drop, a lift and a drop. It didn't sound like, and it was kind of an outcrop rock area, and it wasn't a meadow, but it was a short grass. And it was, not the kind of grass you mow, but it was just kind of a weird surface. But you wouldn't be able to walk and not walk over rocks.
Right.
You can walk if you make a curly Q way, but not. It was just I would have heard clicks,
and you knew
there was no clicking noise. It was just
yeah.
What's that?
And you knew it was there, though. I mean, it was pretty obvious, though, that it was there.
Oh, yeah. I knew it was there, yes.
And Roger, I had a question about so it definitely sounded like, and this is the thing I kind of want to focus on a little bit, it was bipedal, 2 legs, not, you can tell if it's a horse or an elk or any 4-legged animal, even a bear, they just, they have a different gait, and you can pick up on that. So I guess that's kind of a statement, but also a question. Were you pretty convinced that it was a bipedal? The way you describe it.
I really couldn't tell what it was. I can't say that it was 2 feet. I mean, it wasn't a clop clop. It was just I can't really explain it, but it was one noise, and it was very, I don't know what even a good word would be. It was just coming straight forward. I mean, you just heard one noise and one noise. So it made, it sounds like 2 feet. Yeah, more than it would be a 4-legged creature.
One interesting point I'd like to make is it made no bones about hiding its noise approaching the tent, but you didn't hear it go away. So that's a little different than, say, a bear or another type of animal that just wouldn't be cognizant of that sound.
Yeah. And I don't know if I did. I did hear it walk away. And I knew it was next to the tent because the noise of walking stopped. And then it was there for a short time, and then I heard the same noise going off.
Oh, okay. I guess I missed that.
Yeah. Hey, do you think that there were more than one of them? Or was it just one?
I would think it was just one. There was just one next to the tent.
And one thing I want to comment on that I found interesting, because Roger, you and I talked a little bit yesterday about this, and you kind of touched on it, that the guide that you're with was able to catch fish by hand. And the creek was a kind of a smaller creek, right? It wasn't a big river or stream or anything.
Yeah.
Do you think you could have would it be easy to cross the creek, the jump across or step across?
Yeah, we actually did go back and forth across it on top of rocks. You could jump across to the other side and kind of work your way up and down the falls. Yeah.
So a smaller creek. Okay.
It was, there was no depths to it at all. Yeah. The fish were, the fin was out of the water in many cases. You could see them hiding behind rocks, and I suppose they were waiting for, whatever they were eating coming down the stream. But
well, what caught my attention is the ease at which the guide could go in and just catch the fish by hand, because that's probably that may have been very well an area that they would feed on, because these creatures would be very aware of areas that they can go in and catch fish. And Will, do you remember you told me a while back there was a place actually in Washington where these creatures, when the salmon are out, they'll just go out. They're very bold and just go in and catch the fish in front of people.
Yeah, there's actually a few places, but up in northern Washington, towards Canadian borders, one such area.
Okay. And so, Roger, I guess kind of where I was going with this is it would make sense that this thing would be, we're speculating, but it would be curious who's there, possibly in its, one of its feeding areas.
Roger.
And when you mentioned yesterday, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, just kind of referring to that small stream, we went up to Beartooth Mountain on a path that took a good full day between the 2 days to get to where we were going. But when we left, the guide had another route because we aren't in the vacation mode anymore. We were, let's get out and get home. And he took us on a different route back, and it was down a different path. And that path was basically a small river, a creek that went straight down the mountain from where we were. So yesterday, Tom mentioned about them having, that's kind of like a pathway or a highway. When we came up, we didn't have that kind of a highway. This was there were two lakes, and this little waterfall was between the two lakes. But on the other side of where we were, that was a clear path all the way down the mountain into the trees, with that little stream.
Yeah, and just that's what I was talking about. Was these things oftentimes will use little creeks and streams for for traveling and traversing and that sort of thing.
Roger, one question I wanted to ask is that, because I know that you said that you drive buses, have there ever been any reports in that area that you knew of beforehand, like in that area?
No, that, it wasn't even something that we talked about as we were getting ready to go up there. That was, I had one kind of a deal when I was a little kid where, close to our community, there was a sighting of what they thought was a Bigfoot. And, even back then when I was, 10 years old, I wasn't a disbeliever of it, and I was kind of excited about it. And then really I've had no exposure to that, that particular subject up until the last few years when, there's more and more things like you're doing, and there's some, pretty good documentaries about it. And it's interesting to me now, and I'm seeing all of these things that Bigfoot does, or whatever you would call that creature. And that's what, rings back to my experience. It is on borderline encounter, because it was just eerie. The whole thing, that it had a different feel to it. And I guess that, it just kind of put all the pieces together here now, and talking to Tom, and, I actually visited with an individual Tom knows, and I think he kind of hooked it back up through Tom. But as I was explaining it, and we kind of share the same discussions here between a couple of us, and he said, "Well, I'm gonna get a hold of Tom and tell him about this story," and then that's how Tom ended up calling me.
Yeah, and we hear that a lot, where people have an experience, and sometimes, in your case, 30 years ago, and it doesn't go away. They simply, you try and piece the puzzle together, and it doesn't fit. And then ultimately, I think what happens is, you kind of rule out the standard explanations, and you're left with, what we have here.
Well, and I was laying in the tent. That I keep going back to that, but laying in the tent, and I was, to be honest with you, afraid of the bear thing, because we saw bear scat, and of course we have to, pull the food up out of reach of the bear. And I thought, God dang it, here it goes. I've got a bear coming up on my tent, but I would have heard a bear, with vocal sound, and it wasn't the sound that I make when I was walking across that ground. I mean, clearly I didn't hear my heavy foot hitting, and what I heard was something large. It had a large, heavy sound to it. So it just, none of it made sense. Just didn't make sense at all. And then that part where it's just, I know it's standing over me, and it's off to my right side. I can almost feel right where it was, because of the noise coming up to the tent, and then it walks away. And I don't know, it seemed like an eternity, maybe 20, 30 seconds when if you had a watch on it, but it turned and walked off, and that was the end of it.
Not really the sound of a bear either.
No,
Roger.
No, I'd have heard rutting or something,
Right.
Yeah. Roger, can you talk a little bit about that like you said, 20 to 30 seconds where it was just dead silent. Like you knew it was there, and then everything in the woods just kind of went to silent.
Yeah, I held my breath. I remember that. I was trying. I didn't want it to know I was in there, and finally, I just couldn't do that any longer. So I started breathing. So it was long enough so that I couldn't. And I suppose you can hold your breath, and maybe at that point, maybe it felt like hyperventilating or something. But I had to breathe, so it was there long enough for me to try to lay as silent as I could. I didn't want to do something that would excite whatever it was that was outside the tent.
Yeah, good point. And I think we've heard of behavior where these creatures, and I'm going to ask Will if you've heard of encounters where where these things have actually gone up to a tent, exactly like what Roger's described. Curiosity or whatever. But do we have encounters like that?
Oh, yeah. I've heard this quite a few times. Yeah, with exactly the same kind of results.
Yeah. So it's kind of a known behavior of these things.
So Will, is it kind of just curiosity, or are they looking for food, or like what are they doing?
Well, it's really hard to tell. I mean, we had the experience ourselves, back in 1976 where, we talked where the one actually knelt down behind where I was kneeling by the tent and reached under the tent and was going through our gear and grabbed one of the guys that happened to be in the tent. So in that case, I think it was rummaging for food, and it could be that's what they're doing when they approach tents. Looking for food.
And possibly a sack lunch, right?
Well, that's always a possibility.
And it could be, why something if it didn't do anything, because we were distinctly told not even toothpaste in your whatever you had in that tent, no food whatsoever. We had to take that out for the bears, they said.
And Roger, one of the things you mentioned was all the tents were spaced pretty far apart, right?
Yeah, they were, yes. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, my tent was on what would be the
I'm sorry, say that again. Your tent was where now?
Yeah, my tent was on the what would be the southeast corner of the group. I was on the farthest south and farthest east, up against a big rock outcropping, and the rest of them were down the hill towards the cascading waterfall. But I was close enough where I could hear the water rushing.
Oh, okay. And what I found interesting was you had actually climbed up on a rock and spent some time up there. And if I'm just speculating here, but if this thing had been watching the group, which is really not unheard of, it may have been watching the group all day from a strategic location, and it singled you out to, just to see what was going on.
Tom, that's a great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Will, here's kind of a question. Do you think that with Roger's experience, do you think that was maybe an alpha male that was checking him out, or could it have been a juvenile, like kind of like a scout?
Well, the alphas usually kind of hang back. It was probably one of the other members of a group.
I mean, and I was just wondering if the behavior of, it's hanging out on a rock, sitting on a rock in the evening, that's something that nobody else in the group did. And that could be why it sort of targeted you. Excuse me. So just speculation. All right. Well, Roger, I want to thank you, and really an interesting encounter. And, even though it was 30 years ago, sounds like it's something that you've thought about over the years.
Yeah, it hasn't gone away, and I appreciate the discussion I was listening to when you guys were talking to, make it more real. I think that's a nice thing to have some, kind of a validation and a little bit more explanation to what I might have come across there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Hey, Roger, have you heard anything else in that area? Since your experience.
No, I haven't. Not a word at all. No.
Well, Roger, we appreciate your time and very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I look forward to following you guys on your podcast. It's a great resource for us.
We sure appreciate that.
Awesome. Thanks, Roger. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah.
Okay, you bet. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.